This hearing will come to order. And I want to welcome the members of the subcommittee and our distinguished panelists to today's hearing on the creation of a national water initiative to improve and coordinate federal research on water. Chairman Gordon plans to introduce legislation to establish a national water initiative to improve and coordinate federal research and development efforts on water. I'd like to thank him for his leadership and foresight in this area, and I look forward to the opportunity to consider his legislation. In order to meet the water needs or water demands of the future, it is essential that we have the information that we need to balance the water needs for municipalities, industry, agriculture, recreation, and power. The population of the United States has increased by over 25% since 1973, while federal dollars for water research have remained stagnant. A new commitment is needed to ensure that we can meet the water challenges over the next 20 years and onward. Without the right data, it's impossible to know if we are going in the right direction. The discussion draft before us today will provide decision makers at all levels of government with the tools they need to make the tough decisions of the future. The 2004 National Academies Report on Federal Water Research suggests that the United States is not getting its money's worth on water resources research because of a lack of coordination. The Chairman's discussion draft seeks to address this particular issue. The bill codifies an existing interagency committee on water availability and quality led by the Office of Science and Technology Policy and strengthens the committee by incorporating the suggestions of a 2004 National Academies report entitled Confronting the Nation's Water Problems, the Role of Research. We have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us to offer their recommendations on how federal water research programs could be better shaped and their thoughts on the draft legislation. Our panel represents a wide range of interests, and I look forward to hearing each perspective. At this point, I'll turn to our friend, the ranking member, Mr. Inglis, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. Water, as we know, is one of the essential ingredients of life and an issue this committee takes seriously. This is the second hearing we've held in the subcommittee on water resources research. We've also held a full committee hearing on the water energy nexus. I don't think there's a member on this committee whose district hasn't been affected by water, either too much of it or not enough. Not enough right now in the 4th District of South Carolina. I commend the chairman for his draft legislation, which we'll be discussing today. I believe it's the first of many steps that have been recommended to us by leading scientists, industry, academia, and state and local governments. Coordinated research is a necessary part to responding to our nation's water problems. However, I would caution that we take care not to repeat the mistakes of the executive branch by approaching water legislation in the same ad hoc manner that agencies have approached water research. Last week at our full committee markup, we passed 2 water research-related bills out of the committee. I would hope that the chairman's legislation doesn't undermine what we've done in those 2 bills, but instead enhances their effect. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished witnesses, and yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. If there are additional opening statements, they'll be placed in the record at this point. And at this time, I'm pleased to introduce our panel of witnesses. Dr. Mark Shannon is the Director of the United States Strategic Water Initiative. Mr. Todd Christensen is the Director of the Beverage Industry Environmental Roundtable. Dr. Timothy T. Loftus is a water resource planner for Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. I enjoyed visiting your city for 1 hour last night while our plane was diverted around the United States. Mr. Jerry Johnson is the General Manager, D.C. Water and Sewer Authority. Mr. Bradley Spooner is the Principal Engineer for Environmental Services at Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia. And Dr. Upton is the President-elect of the National Institutes for Water Resource. You'll each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing, and when all of you complete your testimony, we will then begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. Dr. Shannon, you may begin.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Chairman Lanson and Ranking Inglis, and other members, distinguished members of the panel. I'm really excited to be here because I think this is this bill is vitally needed for this country, and it's the right thing at the right time. And I really think it's actually visionary in its approach. So I'm going to talk about a number of different things as quickly as I can because there's so many points to be made. But I really appreciate the fact that there's a real idea to focus in on trying to increase water supplies. And if I can have the next slide. I don't know, how do I advance it? So this is just a snapshot to try to, when I go around talking around the country and the world actually about water issues, everybody tends to focus on the arid Southwest and they say, well, we have real problems there. But this map kind of tries to show issues related to water and depletions that are occurring all over the country. And the Southeast has serious issues. And of course, the Midwest, near one of the greatest bodies of fresh water in the world, has also major issues in Illinois, as well as along, of course, the Locality aquifer. So in order to increase supplies, we're seeing a real depletion of and mining of groundwaters. And so we need to look at new ways of doing this. And while the water sector invests right now about approximately $700 million in research foundations, such as the American Water Works and the Water Environment Research Foundation, Water Reuse, collectively invest another $24 million, their efforts are really at applied research to focused interests. And I think a really important thing to do is to improve and advance the basic science and technology such that we can get new technologies diffused into the sector. And so as a representative of the U.S. Strategic Water Initiative, one of the co-founders, what we're really wanting to do is take the basic science that the United States is so good at developing. We're really fantastic at that. But we really have a disconnect with getting this diffused into practice, and so that we can have solutions. So when the water supplies begin to drop and we see a tremendous drop in the level of aquifers, that we can do something about it. And I have a lot of hope that we can do this, and from a science point of view, there's lots of room to move. And so we're a water plant, we have lots of water around it, it's just how we use it and how we incorporate it. So we're really looking at developing new technologies that can then get diffused into practice so that water managers around the country can utilize this. So one of these issues is source water protection, and there's lots of critical issues there. There's a lot of water in both saline and fresh aquifers, and as we're drilling down, what we're seeing is that the water is getting saltier and saltier and needing more and more treatment. So we need to be able to figure out how to do this effectively and affordably. We need to understand what the withdrawal rates are of both the freshwater aquifers and the saltwater aquifers that underlie them. What we can do about the 800 billion gallons of water that we get from produced water, that could be a fantastic source of water that currently is not. So there's a lot of sources of water that are available that we just don't use today. And with some more science and technology, we can, in fact, very effectively use these and alleviate a lot of the problems with source protection. And we've got to be able to prevent cross-contamination, because as we start to pump down, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, you'll see that there's starting to be cross-contamination, and we need to do more treatment because of it. Can I have the next slide? So this is a projection of possible increases that are going to occur by 2030 due to population growth, two factors of population growth, and we're using more and more water because our economically. And so if you look at this is a percentage increase since 2000. We're seeing significant factors all over this country, and we're going to need to see major investments by local areas. And so even if you're looking over at California and it doesn't look, like a super high amount, this 100 to 300%, they already use so much that that's actually a huge value. And so we need to be able to figure out, there's a lot of critical issues, I think, for the U.S. And I'd like to go to the next slide. Another one here. This shows that there's to do source water protection, we need to really be able to couple the contamination and the sources, because they fall one on top of the other, and that's really driving some more treatment. And finally, the last slide, just to make my point, one more please, is that population growth is really driving everything. And this one basically shows that if we, on our current trajectory, that's the green line on top, we're going to have to increase our water supplies for this country by 62%. But if we drop down to the bottom, that's if we start conservation, we can drop that and we only need to increase it by 30%. So this sort of gives you an overview of why I think we need science and technology here. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Mr. Christensen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lamson and Ranking Member Inglis, distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Todd Christensen. I'm the Director and Chair for the Beverage Industry Environmental Roundtable. not so coincidentally named BIER, B-I-E-R. BIER is a unique, creative, voluntary collaboration of 12 global beverage companies from across 4 beverage sectors: beer, wine, distilled spirits, and non-alcoholic beverages. Our member companies operate nearly 200 production and packaging facilities spread across the United States, 35 states, and many, many auxiliary operations. BIER is unique in that it's an independent, proactive convenience of private industry working together to drive water conservation, resource protection, energy efficiency, and climate change mitigation. We do this through benchmarking and data collection, best practice sharing, as well as working on various venues like this to inform public policy. We're here today to applaud the subcommittee and Chairman Bart Gordon for their focus and commitment to look at policy changes that will allow us to succeed in meeting our country's water challenges today and into the future. We applaud the opportunity that this act under consideration provides for federal government to demonstrate leadership, employing its role in inventorying and coordinating collaboration on water initiatives from across the federal agencies, facilitating commitment and allocation of resources to support research and development, creating space for stakeholders to come together and share an input to this process and the ensuing agenda that is implied, and its role in building awareness both across industry and government and within the public domain itself. The September 2007 strategy report, which we've been provided a copy with, produced by the National Science and Technology Council Committee on Environment and Natural Resources, which we understand is a founding work leading to today's policy discussion, we believe is an excellent work product, and it's one that provides both a comprehensive look at water challenges we face today and expect in the future, as well as it outlines what we believe are some of the implied research and development activities and needs going forward. We support the current policy considerations, those that will lead to streamlining, increased efficiency, and collaborative efforts across federal agencies. We believe that's a very important factor for us. It provides a much stronger working environment for our industries. A few of the research priorities that we would note include comprehensive water resource inventory, but not only today, but looking at future needs and possibly doing some scenario planning. We believe also there's a need in research to assess our current country's water infrastructure, which includes both supply, delivery, as well as treatment capabilities. As many of us know, we have an aging infrastructure. There's a lot of opportunity for conservation within that structure, and we believe that some thorough assessment and needs an opportunities assessment of that is warranted. We also believe and would prioritize innovative technology and practice development, as Dr. Shannon has implied here. We believe that's an important piece. Public awareness and education is the fourth piece that we see needs development. We need to improve the practices of our public, of our industry, and create a greater level of focus to water stewardship. We'd like to leave you with a couple thoughts for consideration as you move forward in the policy development efforts. To highlight a few points of my written testimony that's been submitted, we would ask you to consider establishing a long-term vision and empower the developing interagency committee with clear goals and milestones aligned with that developed vision. We see an opportunity, given the current roles that state and tribal entities play in water management today, for incorporation of that role into the work of the interagency committee and or future policy development. We hope you consider the experience, knowledge, technology that resides in American industry groups and NGOs, and that they will be developing into the future. There's quite a bit of energy and money being put towards water consumption, efficiency technologies to drive water use efficiency within our industry. And there's a lot of valuable technology out there to be mined and distributed and shared. We see that as a role of federal government to help facilitate that. Lastly, Chairman Lamson, Ranking Member Inglis, water issues are a serious and growing concern for all Americans. We will need new technologies, changes in water use practices, and new collaborations across all industry, public, and governmental concerns to meet our future challenges. To these efforts, you have our full support. On behalf of the BIER member companies and myself, thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Christensen. I'll get that out in a minute. And Dr. Loftus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Lamson, members of the Illinois delegation, and fellow members of the Energy and Environment Subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to comment this morning. I come before you to speak of implementing a new national water research and development initiative. On behalf of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and with funding from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, I've had the privilege for the past 2 years of leading a new regional water supply planning initiative in an 11-county Greater Chicago region. This regional planning effort was initiated following Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich's Executive Order 2006-1. The National Water Initiative could provide states, local partners, and the private sector with the guidance and information necessary to meet the challenges similar to what we have encountered during this initial phase of planning in Illinois. For example, earlier this month, CMAP issued a water demand study for our region that reveals gaps in data due to inadequate water use reporting. It has been said that you can't manage what you don't measure. Thus, the current status of water use reporting must be addressed if we are to fully grasp how future water demand will reconcile with our water supplies. The National Water Initiative should enable states and their local planning partners to address the need for comprehensive reporting across all water use sectors as part of a new national water census that has been recommended by the Subcommittee on Water Availability and Quality. The population in the Chicago metropolitan region is projected to grow by over 3 million people, or 38%, by the year 2050. Water demand scenarios for our region indicate that water use could increase as much as 64% during that time, absent any policy intervention and without specific strategies for actively managing both demand and supply. Factoring in climate change scenarios reveals that demand for our water in our region could grow even further. On the supply side, our region's water sources are generous but finite. Illinois access to Lake Michigan water is constrained by U.S. Supreme Court consent decree. The deep bedrock aquifer underlying northeastern Illinois is being dewatered. The system of shallow aquifers shows evidence of increasing contamination from chlorides. Our 2 inland river sources are threatened by non-point source pollution and required to maintain minimum in-stream flows. Overall, as elsewhere in the United States, our challenge in the Chicago region is not so much scarcity, but water waste and an institutional structure for water management that leaves plenty of room for improvement. As part of our charge from the state, CMAP created a 35-member Northeastern Illinois Regional Water Supply Planning Group composed of elected officials, private sector representatives, and other stakeholders. The Regional Water Group has already adopted several water use conservation and efficiency measures as the centerpiece of the nascent regional water supply plan that is expected next year. Regrettably, our regional studies funding is currently jeopardized by state of Illinois budget issues. While our planning effort in northeastern Illinois is proactive rather than a response to a crisis situation, I can tell you from experience that it is difficult to get people to take a long-term view. That can be one important function of the National Water Research and Development Initiative, to define and help implement a water conservation and efficiency agenda that encourages long-range planning by giving clear guidance to states and the private sector alike. The National Water Initiative's promise of improved horizontal cooperation among federal agencies should be coupled with improved vertical coordination with those of us at state, regional, and local levels who are working to increase stewardship of our most vital resource. Among other considerations, a new federal effort should also recognize the 5 following points. Issues of water quality are inseparable from our need for water availability. Improved water monitoring is prerequisite to informed decision-making. Achieving water conservation and efficiency goals will help our nation achieve energy efficiency goals. It is in our nation's best interest to improve our understanding of water-related ecosystem services and ecosystem needs for water as well. Finally, federal support can provide key incentives for effective planning, especially when local pressures tend to promote short-term rather than long-term thinking. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Loftus. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Lamson. Members of the committee, I'm Jerry Johnson, General Manager of the District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority, otherwise known as DC WASA. I appreciate your interest in the federal role in research, development, and research coordination in the areas of water supply, water conservation, and water management. I also appreciate the opportunity to testify before the House Committee on Science and Technology, Subcommittee on Energy and the Environment, and to comment on a national water research and development effort. DC WASA has a broad mission of providing reliable, cost-effective water and wastewater services. We're an independent authority of the District of Columbia and serve a multi-jurisdictional area here in the region. We distribute drinking water and collect wastewater for more than 500,000 residents and commercial and government customers here in the District of Columbia, including this U.S. Capitol complex. And we treat wastewater for another 1.6 million residents in Maryland and Virginia. Mr. Chairman, from my perspective, there are a number of factors that complicate efforts to better coordinate and manage water resources, including geography, state and local jurisdiction and political boundaries, the site-specific nature of statutory and regulatory framework, a structure of local and regional water and land use agencies, as well as a strong history that includes the evolution of development around waterways that serve as both sources of drinking water, support for industrial and other economic activities, and receiving waters for discharges of effluent from wastewater treatment plants and overland runoff. However, all of these can be overcome. A broad framework to established for supporting water resources research and development is a pathway for identifying important national priorities while also helping to disseminate information on a range of issues we confront in improving our management of water resources. However, the opportunity to establish a framework that better coordinates ongoing research will certainly strengthen our efforts with the research and our research agendas, providing a stronger brand of national leadership that promotes a consensus and identifies priorities will encourage even greater initiative on the part of academic institutions, professional organizations and associations, research foundations, local agencies, and industry. As you know, water rarely is a localized resource. It rises and crosses jurisdictional boundaries in cities, counties, and states, which makes the federal role extremely critical as we address these issues. A number of federal agencies ranging from the U.S. EPA, the U.S. State Department, Agriculture, and others are making a number of national professional and industry associations work together and have established over the years a very important research effort that's based on collaboration across these professional lines. Another example, a couple of examples of those are the American Water Works Association, which has sponsored over 635 completed research projects with another 300 that are underway, with excess of 500 researchers that have been involved. Another example is the Water Environment Research Federation, a leading independent scientific research organization, and I'm proud to be a member of the board of that organization. And we have, in fact, done over 400 research projects totaling some $89 million in value. Similarly, academic institutions participate in important research that contributes to the understanding of our interactions with the environment. These efforts also enhance our ability to manage water resources and reduce potentially negative effects on human activity. Scientists who are employed in our wastewater treatment plant and our water quality division are participating in a fair amount of this research in areas of biosolids management and providing a good bit of information on corrosion control as it relates to the drinking water distribution system. We also work with a number of universities, to include Virginia Tech and Howard University, on a number of research initiatives. But there are a number of initiatives that really need to be examined. I think a few examples of those are understanding when water is safe to drink, understanding the phenomenon of pharmaceuticals and nanotechnology as it relates to water, biosolids management, point source control, just to name a few. Mr. Chairman, once again, I wish to express my appreciation to you and the committee for your interest in these critical issues. We most often come to Capitol Hill seeking support for massive infrastructure improvements and to undertake to ensure protection of our resources and the environment. There are, however, initiatives that the federal government can undertake that are at least as important as appropriation bills. a national initiative to build better coordination and stronger foundation for developing priorities, enhancing overall national research agenda, and providing information we need to improve our management of our water resources is just that initiative. I believe that you can be confident that the successful effort will result in not only a more cost-effective research initiative, but also positive impact on water resource development and management through better planning, lower costs, and improved efficiency. In closing, Mr. Chairman, many of the issues that I've discussed in this testimony, and particularly the written testimony, are not new to the research community. And the climate change, however, is a substantially different kind of challenge. Although the debate regarding global warming continues in some quarters, there's no doubt that water resources can and are dramatically affected by local and regional climate change. Strengthening the national research agenda through better coordination could help to develop an important new role and provide a critical advantage for the successful addressing of many of these new challenges that we face. Also, I would just point out to the committee that a couple of things in the legislation. One relates to funding that I think probably could be addressed and strengthened, and the other is consideration of the difficulty in uncoupling water resources from wastewater management and the whole notion of things related to that particular industry. Thank you very much. I'll be pleased to answer any questions you have, and I apologize for going over my time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Spooner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here today on behalf of the American Public Power Association, which represents the interests of more than 2,000 publicly owned electric utility systems serving approximately 45 million Americans. APPA members serve some of the nation's largest cities, along with many small and medium-sized communities in 49 states. Water availability is crucial to many types of electricity generation. For hydroelectric power, it is the energy source. For fossil and nuclear steam generation, water is needed for many in-plant process uses. Water is therefore crucial for APPA's members to therefore deliver electricity to support a healthy environment and a vibrant economy. Today, APPA would like to highlight 3 of its recommendations for the committee to consider. The first recommendation is that the legislation should include measures to ensure high-quality data. Developing a research and assessment plan and conducting the research called for by the plan will involve the production, analysis, and use of a significant amount of technical data. APPA recommends that the bill consider available resources and guidelines intended to ensure data of high quality. An example would be the resources and guidelines developed under the Federal Data Quality Act of 2001, also known as the Information Quality Act. Of particular importance is that data used for implementing the bill be objective, transparent, peer-reviewed, unbiased, and reproducible. Because many departments and agencies will participate in developing the plan and conducting the research, coordination of high-quality data among the parties by the Interagency Committee will be especially important. The second recommendation is that the legislation should include research related to projected significant water consumption increases with carbon capture and sequestration technology. Various global climate bills introduced in Congress have contemplated the future use of a technology called carbon capture and sequestration, or CCS. The intent of CCS is to capture carbon dioxide resulting from the combustion of fossil fuels at power plants before the carbon dioxide is emitted. Several studies done by the Department of Energy's National Energy Technology Laboratory indicate that capturing the carbon dioxide at a power plant would require a doubling of the plant's consumptive water use. This significant increase in water consumption appears to run contrary to the goals of the bill, and therefore appears to be an issue ripe for research under the bill. The third recommendation is that the legislation should ensure participation by states, local communities, and stakeholders. Early in 2008, the state of Georgia adopted a Georgia Comprehensive Statewide Water Management Plan. The plan came about following an extensive stakeholder process involving agricultural and business interests, local governments, nonprofit agencies, trade associations, and others. Under the guidance of Governor Perdue and Georgia Environmental Protection Division Director Dr. Carol Couch, the Georgia Plan was approved by the State Water Council and the State General Assembly. Of particular note is that the Georgia Plan was successfully developed in a state experiencing both drought conditions and strong economic growth. The success of the Georgia Plan process suggests some similar processes that might be beneficial to the proposed plan called for in the draft bill. For example, the bill should consider extending the duties of the outreach office to specifically bring states and local communities into the federal plan development process earlier and more extensively. Likewise, consideration should be given to extending the duties of the outreach office to establishing a stakeholder group to provide input during development of the plan. These entities and groups should be able to provide valuable information to make the final federal plan more effective. In wrapping up, I would like to mention that in April of 2007, APPA sent a letter to the full committee chairman, Gordon, in support of legislation designed to develop a methodology for and a complete national assessment of geologic storage capacity for carbon dioxide. This legislation was ultimately included in the energy bill enacted into law in December of 2007, and APPA thanks the full committee chairman and the committee as a whole for their hard work on this important matter, and we look forward to the results being made available. Thank you for the opportunity to provide input today. We hope that you will consider the American Public Power Association and MEAG Power as resources for questions that may arise as the process moves forward. Thank you.
Indeed, we will. Thank you very much. And recognizing via teleconference, we have Dr. Hatch. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Lamson, Representative Inglis, I hope the AV is working sufficiently. I'm Upton Hatch, the interim director of the North Carolina Water Resources Research Institute, located in North Carolina State. I'm also president-elect of the National Institute of Water Resources, or NIWAR. I appreciate this opportunity, and I apologize. We are hosting a annual conference of the University Council of Water Resources here in Durham. As an academic, my degrees are from Dartmouth, Georgia, and Minnesota, all in economics, particularly water resource economics, and my research currently is focusing on the effectiveness of water conservation measures and efficiency. I'm testifying on the part of NIWAR, which is a organization of 54 institutes, 50 states, and 4 territories. It was created by the Water Resources Act of 1964. It's been continuously funded since then, but inflation-adjusted dollars have actually declined quite dramatically. In authorizing these institutes, Congress' intent was to increase the amount of research conducted in the water area, aid in the entry of new scientists, also to train new scientists, and to distribute the results of the sponsored research to the water managers and the general public. It was recently, in 2006, reauthorized. The Water Resources Institute received core funding from the U.S. Geological Survey, and this core funding is a dependable source of funding that is leveraged on the order of 5 or 10 to 1 with other federal agencies, state, and also some local groups. And we strongly support this idea of better coordination. As has been suggested by others, there have been 3 well-known reports that we support strongly, the so-called SWAC report and the 2001 and 2004 NRC studies. Just without going through all the results there, of course, several major points jump out. The condition of water resources in many parts of the United States and the world are deteriorating. Our institutions that can balance the ecological, environmental types of needs for water and also human needs is not sufficient. Obviously, population growth and competing uses for the water are a major problem. In the southeast, where I grew up, most of the infrastructure was built in the 60s, and obviously the population has increased dramatically in that area. and also there's the climate issue. So I guess you might say the major issues in my mind would be the competing uses, the population growth, aging infrastructure, and the lack of coordination and the stagnant financial support at the federal level. It's interesting that the NRC report did say that we need to make a new commitment to research on water resources, and we need a new mechanism is needed to coordinate water research currently fragmented among approximately 20 federal agencies. In the NRC report, there were several research areas that were focused, although there were 43 in total. Just a couple of those would be water supply enhancing technologies, understanding land use change, doing a better job of measurement and monitoring, understanding the frequency and cause of severe weather and climate, global climate change, economic returns to these competing uses, legal regimes, adaptive management, the role of the private sector, and also doing a better job of getting stakeholder input. The federal involvement in water resources is particularly important because watersheds, water drainage areas, if you will, don't conform to state boundaries, and so we inevitably end up with contentious situations among the various states that share a watershed. Also, research from one state is obviously applicable to research or to solutions in another state. So we have a classic public good situation. In North Carolina, our recent droughts have made it clear that it is rainfall to some extent that causes our problems, but it's not just rainfall. Our technologies and our management of these competing uses is crucial, and the coordination among federal and state groups that represent these competing uses is a very important area that I believe this legislation targets. It's also, I think it's interesting to pull forth from the NRC report and actually read a quote here. The Water Resource Research Institute system, which is NIWAR, provides an existing well-organized mechanism for articulating state-based research needs and for bringing together water managers, stakeholders across a wide cross-section of the public, and academic researchers and academic institutions throughout each state. The Institute system can provide an effective means for communication between, for example, a national level research coordination body, which is similar to what we are proposing or is being proposed today, and state and regional water resource agencies. I'd like to conclude by saying that WRI or NIWAR is uniquely positioned to address this initiative or to assist because, as mentioned by several of our earlier speakers, high-quality, unbiased research results is crucial. And also long-term and multidisciplinary work is also useful. And the flexibility and adaptability to local conditions is another aspect that WRI can help provide. It can also go from institutional to technical solutions and the full spectrum there. It has an established network that's been working over 40 years now and is good at addressing regional issues. The education, the students that have graduated and developed their expertise through this program, I don't have an exact number, but we have about 50 right now in North Carolina that are currently being supported in some fashion by the Institute. And you can then multiply by the 50 states and get some kind of notion as to the level of support that this is providing to students. Also, I think the institutes have experience in assessing priorities and assisting in increasing the efficiency of water resource investments. And as mentioned earlier, high-quality data is very much a hallmark of the Water Resources Institutes. So I would like to, first, I would like to express my appreciation for being involved in this and apologize for this AV situation we have here. We strongly support this initiative, and we agree that something other than an ad hoc process that has been mostly done in the past is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hatch. We will now begin with our first round of questions, and the chairman will recognize himself for 5 minutes. And for all of you to comment on, let me ask you a couple of questions. The Academy's report indicated the outreach mandate needed to be strengthened and improved. what is the current experience with SWAC with respect to communication with yours or similar organizations, and are additional funds needed to support a broader outreach effort, or is explicit direction to undertake these actions sufficient? And Dr. Shannon, if you would start and the rest of you comment as you care.
Just to recap, the issue you're asking specifically about the communication from the group, the SWAC, to the
And experience, yeah, with it.
yeah. So the experience is from the industrial side of things, which is really what I've been representing, is that there has not been a lot of diffusion from the federal government to an organization that are building water technologies, and that would be a fantastic thing if this could be improved and increased to increase the diffusion of knowledge and the coordination. There has been some with the National Science, through the National Science Foundation that I represent as well, and that's of course much more closely allied. So with the work that's been done at the National Academy of Sciences, et cetera. So perhaps these folks here would be better in addressing your question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, speaking for the beverage companies, I think there's what I've heard from our participants is that there's a general need for greater coordination, but also the communication is a key piece to that coordination, and interactive communication. So it's a two-way flow. I think the general feeling I would say that my constituents have is probably the ability to access and provide input. So there's not a clear pathway or a vehicle to communicate into these organizations necessarily, and communication outwards and synthesis of that communication could be improved, generally speaking.
It's my sense that there's little to no dialogue taking place between SWAC or many federal agencies, and perhaps the state of Illinois, which might be the most logical first step in communication. So I think there's room for improvement there.
It seems to me that most of the communication has probably been through interest groups and associations, as opposed to bringing the effort down to the local level, where individuals who may not have the resources or may not be a part of some of the national organizations would have an opportunity to have more direct input into the effort. So I think that would be a very critical element, and I think it ought to be mandated. And I think that those agencies that then are having to do the outreach would probably be better positioned to understand what the resource requirements would be in order to reach down to the actual local governments, as opposed to just assuming that they've cast a broad enough net by dealing with the interest groups.
No additional comments, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Hatch?
Yes. If you talk about the communication between SWAC and NIWAR, that has been excellent. In fact, we are quite familiar with many of the people on the committee. Then when you go from NIWAR or the state institutes to the local group, in North Carolina, actually, it's fairly good. And it's, to some extent, it's the local initiative. We have workshops for continuing education for construction people. We have PDH, they call it, professional development hours. We work closely with the state government people and departments of natural resource. We actually have a consortium we call the Urban Water Consortium that are the city managers or the water managers for the 11 largest cities in the state of North Carolina. So I think it's very much a mixed picture for our NIWAR group. Some states have quite an extensive program that could be supported further or could be used as an example for some other states. But I would have to admit that it's not completely NIWAR deserves all the accolades there, that it's often the local communities. And in our particular local community, universities and research, we're the research triangle. We have Duke, we have NC State, we have University of North Carolina, we have Wake Forest. So it's a very unique situation that probably isn't replicated in many areas of the country.
I'm going to squeeze this in and let you comment on it, if you will, make it as succinct as possible. What's the most significant deficiency with respect to the federal government's current role in ensuring water availability and quality. I want to comment the most significant deficiency with respect to the federal government's current role in ensuring water availability and quality.
Are you saying efficiency or inefficiency?
Deficiency.
Deficiency.
The most significant deficiency.
I believe it's coordination. I think the general public looks in the newspaper and they see something about the Corps has this requirement. Then they look in there and they see that the hydropower, FERC, has another requirement. Then they look at the city municipal drinking water and they see yet another. And the governor has yet another opinion. So it seems to me that this coordination is crucial that you're suggesting. And we strongly support it.
Anyone else want to make a comment? Dr. Loftus?
We have the Clean Water Act and the Coastal Zone Management Act for water quality guidance. We don't really have anything similar for issues of water supply, and so in my view, we might benefit from a national water policy act of some sort that does for water quantity what the other two acts have done for water quality. That's the biggest deficiency in my view, and then the other matter would be to ensure that we've got that vertical coordination. We definitely can use better coordination at the horizontal federal level, but we need it to also move up and down through states, providing states with goals and guidance and incentives so that at the regional, on the ground level where I'm at, we have a strong sense for what the big picture is and overarching goals are.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to make a
I just a quick comment, if I may, Chairman. I believe the representative group that the biggest lack of or missing piece or deficiency is in the consolidated information and data and communication. So again, what this act is intended to address, it coordinates, serves as a clearinghouse, consolidates the available information on water quantity and quality, and distributing some of that information. So some of the research that is here to define our water resources and provide the basis for planning and decision making and consolidating some of that, certainly at the federal level, is needed. That leadership piece is missing right now, in our opinion.
I actually agree with all these gentlemen, but just the issue is that there really is no coordination right now between the research that's done by the federal government and funded by the federal government and its diffusion into practice. That's also a key issue. It's missing.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to repeat my concern about carbon capture and sequestration that would effectively be mandated or strongly encouraged with some of the global climate legislation, where perhaps the water quantity impacts have not been adequately considered.
Thank you very much. My time has expired, and I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Inglis, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Spinners, following up on that part of it, does it, I'm not sure I know how water is used in carbon sequestration. What is the process there? Do you happen to know, or you're just aware it uses a lot of water?
DOE has produced a series of reports where they've looked at a number of the impacts and costs of carbon capture and sequestration on both retrofitting existing utility units and constructing new units. And that goes into quite a bit of detail, hundreds of pages, and I can't really paraphrase or summarize that very well, but it's a very water-intensive process to capture the carbon dioxide.
Interesting. Yeah. Anybody else know anything about that? I'd like to find out what the process is there, and I guess there are various technologies that we might use for carbon sequestration. The concept of coordination makes some sense, but it's got to be balanced against the experience, say, of Homeland Security, which some people think hasn't been so coordinated and has in fact created additional layers of bureaucracy, right, to respond to the threats. Any ideas about how we make sure we don't repeat those mistakes and have coordination, but not a layer of additional bureaucracy that just is overlaid over the existing bureaucracy?
I make a comment from a strategic thinking perspective, a strategic planning perspective. I think it's always founded in having a clear vision of what you define as success and putting those types of controls in. Attaching to that some milestones and clearly expectations for outcomes. So I think that setting the clear direction and the boundaries and scope are probably the most critical piece to avoiding scope creep, which is often a problem. And I think that's one of the things that we see is we're having a hard time with vision in the current discussion, and we see an opportunity to add more clarity on what the vision is and the purpose of this. This is not to create another agency. This is not, that's how we're interpreting this anyways, but is actually a functional group that spans a certain scope of activity in the federal government and helps create priority and set some focus, ties into the budgeting and things of that nature. But from our perspective, I think that's one of the missing pieces, or certainly a place to enhance the current policy discussion.
I suppose that each of you must have some hypothesis maybe about what this research is going to show about water usage and availability. Anybody want to dare to state a hypothesis about? I think it's going to have something to do with conservation, but that'd be my guess as a hypothesis here. Anybody want to venture one as to what the main thrust of this research might prove? Leaving aside some of the key issues that Mr. Johnson mentioned about pharmaceuticals and things like that. I mean, that's very interesting research that is very important. Then the availability issue is probably some hypotheses out there about what you're going to find.
At the risk of trying to project out with a crystal ball, which I don't really have, but the issue, I think if we get much better information as to where the water is and the state that the water is at, particularly the issues with groundwater. Surface water is fairly well understood. USGS has done a great job. There's been a real fracture of who's responsible for collecting groundwater information, and we've really gone county by county. I mean, it's there's not really a whole database, which is you keep hearing referred to. I think what people will find is that the replenishment rate is less than the withdrawal rate, and that issue will become really crucial. The main issue was what one can do about this. Can we reuse? Can we restore? Can we reclaim water and recharge aquifers? That would be a critical issue, which nobody right now, there's no federal agency that says that's their charter. You can say, well, EPA has a charter for water quality, but what's the charter for that? The Bureau of Reclamation has some charter, but there is no one particular agency. So the issue really, to your earlier question, that what could happen is really to be as Mr. Christensen said, you really make sure the scope is well defined in each agency. I think right now we have many agencies that are doing the same thing, and yet nobody has single charge. And to try to, if you can, craft a way that this committee could actually define who does what and who has what charter, I think would be the best way of approaching it.
Mr. Inglis, I would hypothesize that a nationwide commitment to conservation and efficiency will be the least expensive new supply we can develop.
Johnson.
Very profound. I agree with all of my colleagues here, but I think that one of the things that we have learned, in particular with the looking at nanotechnology and pharmaceuticals, is that we have developed technology to identify and define many of these elements that are out in the environment, and that technology has far outstripped the research and the technology that's necessary to avoid having those constituents and elements that have the potential to be harmful to health in getting into the environment. So I think that that kind of research is going to need to catch up with the research for the identification of these things. The other thing I think is just methods that we might employ, in particular in urban environments, to reduce pollution and to capture that water supply as a better water supply as it comes out of our urban environment in particular.
I have a comment. I think the most important element right now is the competing uses of the supply. I think that we, through the last so many decades, have always used increasing storage, building reservoirs as our way to deal with water resource problems. And I think now it's more competing demands and management, better efficiency, conservation, looking at things on a more long-term basis, looking at things on a watershed basis is also crucial because we're getting into so many issues of jurisdiction. So, and I guess water quality is the other one. Well, you can't separate quality from quantity. It's quantity of a certain quality. So, I think those are the kinds of issues that are coming up.
Just like to mention that with the Georgia Water Management Plan, one of the first implementation steps was water conservation, more emphasis on that. It could be started and implemented to some degree almost immediately. And I'd be glad to furnish a copy of the plan for the record, along with some information on CCS water use, response to a prior question.
Thanks. You're welcome. Now recognized for 5 minutes, the gentlelady from...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, each of you did talk about conservation as, an important component, maybe even, a principal component of looking at our nation's water supply. So I'm really curious as to whether you think that there is a place in the legislation that we're considering where we might ask specific data points and what those might be regarding conservation. Mr. Christensen, particularly you and your industry looking at aspects, for example, of bottling water in that industry, competing uses of agriculture, and then what questions we also might ask regarding conservation that we can do as individuals and homeowners that might impact our water supply. Maybe begin with you, Mr. Christensen.
I need to ask for clarification again, if you would restate or summarize the question.
Well, I'm curious about what your industry, how your industry would look at conservation, because you mentioned conservation is an important aspect of the water supply, and how your industry looks at conservation and the data points that we might ask about what we can do around conservation to get to.
Certainly. We measure, in the beverage industry, they measure total water consumption, monitor that very closely. They look at water use at various departments within the production process and within the supply chain. So they look beyond the four walls of their operating facilities, but also look down the supply chain. So beginning to take a life cycle assessment, look at water consumption to develop a product. In addition, so you've got the quantitative measurement and use of water, and you begin to attack your heavy user water departments conceptually. And so you're looking at water use efficiency against some production quantity. The other piece that I think people have had great effectiveness at is to create a culture within these businesses of water stewardship and conservation. So that the employee that's walking around the plant sees a faucet on, turns it off. It's like turning the lights off when you leave the room. So the two aspects that we're looking at are the quantitative aspect of water use and efficiency as a very clear measure, usually measured against, normalized against some production level, whether it's kilograms or per liter of product developed, whatever. And the other is really trying to look at and benchmark practices and culture within the businesses as a data point and an indicator of how we're doing. So, hope that answers your question.
Dr. Loftus, do you have a comment about what we might look at around conservation that could have an impact on water supply?
Yes, thank you. In the Chicago region, we have adopted 14 specific measures, and they will aim at households, residential use. They will aim at commercial, industrial, institutional accounts, and so there's something in there for everyone. Some of those measures will require changes of behavior, and some will not. Some of those measures you can very easily quantify the water savings that could be expected upon implementation. Others are a little less easy to quantify. But the beauty of the whole conservation movement is that we only have to look to other states that have been in crisis mode, that have been forced to really lead this edge California, Arizona, for example, Texas, and more or less emulate what they've already tried and learned about through trial and error. So that's one of the messages I brought back to Chicago, is we don't have to really recreate new wheels so much as we have to emulate a lot of the good work that's already taken place in various parts across the country. So I called out California. The California Urban Water Conservation Council is a real pioneer, for example, in establishing a whole structure for promoting and achieving real conservation savings. The new Alliance for Water Efficiency, in some respects, an outgrowth of the success of the California Council, but now the Alliance has a North American scope, headquartered in Chicago. They're very committed to promoting the whole conservation and efficiency agenda, because there are so many benefits, both on the water intake side as well as on the wastewater treatment side.
And is there a national snapshot of what a conservation strategy might look like for the country, as opposed to the individual snapshots that we might get in a region or a locality?
Well, that's a good question. I want to say we could create one without too much work if one didn't exist already. Maybe my colleagues can respond to whether or not such a snapshot exists.
I think my time is up.
Oh, I actually, that was one of the, sorry. I actually showed one where I actually tried to capture the nation as a snapshot in just one graph. Conservation is essential, because if we stay on our current rate of increasing consumption per capita, we'll have to increase our total water supplies by 60% over the next 30 years, which is not possible. So, but if we just focus on domestic use, that we would have to cut our domestic use by 60%. Everybody would have to use 60% less. Our industries would have to use 30%. Energy would have to use 30% less. And ag would have to use 20% less. Agriculture consumes 70 to 80% of the water used in the United States. So in this, talking about the different sectors, we really have to, and that's one of the essential things that the federal government can help do, is to bring all these different sectors together. Dealing with one sector without thinking of the other is one hand clapping.
Okay, thank you. Next we have, I'll recognize for 5 minutes, Dr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. It's going to be a race between water availability and availability of liquid fuels, which brings our communities to their knees first. You've been talking about water conservation, and we are not very aggressive in water conservation. I remember that I was proposing building houses that got all of their water from the water that falls on the roof. If you're in this area with 40 inches of rainfall, you have an average house, and upwater falls on the roof of your house to meet all of your water needs for the year if you are all conserving. And our state people said, oh, gee, you can't drink rainwater, cistern water. I said, well, let me understand this. The rain falls on the hog lot, and the water from the hog lot goes into the creek, and the creek goes into the river, and you pull the water out of the river and treat it, and that's my drinking water. I said, can I please have the water before it goes through the hog lot? That seemed to me to be a reasonable request. I also suggested in conserving water in the home that you might use gray water. We're one of the few major countries that uses drinking water to flush its toilets and wash its streets. And one of the county officials said, oh, gee, you can't do that. Somebody might drink the water out of the hose when they were washing their car. And my response was, you don't drink water out of your toilet, do you? You learn where you get drinking water and where you don't get drinking water. You mentioned the relationship between energy and water. Indeed, they are very closely related. We're getting now a bit more than 1 million barrels of water a day from the Canadian oil sands. The availability of water will shortly severely limit that. And I note in our country that we use drinking water to cool our heating plants. in most of the rest of the world, these not heating plants to cool our power generation plants. In most of the rest of the world, they are placed in population centers, and the waste heat is used for district heating. We do almost none of that in this country. So we have lots and lots of opportunities for conservation, and I see little effort to conserve either water or energy, and we need aggressive conservation in both of those. I understand that in some parts of the West that we are actually pumping glacial water, that these aquifers are not being replenished. Is that true?
Yes, but mostly in the Midwest. It's mostly the upper Midwest.
The upper Midwest.
The upper
but
Midwest.
If
yeah.
that's true, how can sane people issue one more building permit in an area where you're getting your water from glacial water and you're not replenishing the reservoir? Can you help me understand that?
I wish I could. Most of those permits, it's all very local. Each state has different laws on groundwater withdrawals. Sometimes even each county, each city has different regulations. And so in my hometown, if you own land, you can drop a well and start, and it's glacial water, and we can just pump it out as we desire. It's a problem.
Then what will we do when it's gone? What will those communities do?
This is an absolutely critical issue that we have to address.
Yeah, I'm really kind of depressed because that's a pretty simple kind of a thing. And if we can't have any rational response to that, what kind of confidence do you have that we're going to have a rational response to our national varied challenges with water?
In the issue of groundwater recharge is the real issue, and can we actually start recharging? And humans have actually started to change this by digging basements and all sorts of activities where we've now gotten a connection between the surface water and this glacial aquifers. So there is issues of recharge, and you just want to make sure you recharge these aquifers cleanly. And there are possibilities for doing it. We're not doing it currently, but we can, in fact, change that if we start working on it now.
Mr. Chairman, there are three things that we've just taken for granted. That is breathable air and adequate amounts of usable water and adequate amounts of liquid fuels. Our society, our world, our country faces real challenges in these areas, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing. Most people don't much think about water, but it is just about as critical as liquid fuels, which we're thinking a lot about now. So thank you for your foresight in holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Your thoughts are always impressive and causes us to think. We'll see where we go with it all. We have next Mr. McNerney. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things I'm most interested in is the impact of efficiency, water efficiency and conservation on farming in terms of productivity and profitability. Could any of you take that question on? How is efficiency going to make farming more profitable and more productive? Can it? Or are farmers going to be taking a hit when we go toward conservation? It's inevitable.
Anybody else? I'll be willing
Sure.
to tackle this. I actually went to India and a couple of weeks ago just to give an issue about agriculture, and they doubled their food production by basically doubling their water withdrawals out of their aquifers to reach the green revolution, and now their aquifers are drying, so they're very, very worried about what to do to maintain their efficiency. Well, Israel has really done a tremendous job in cutting the amount of water and increasing their agricultural output. So this is an area that with some new technologies and some new investment, we can actually increase, I think, agricultural output in many regards while reducing the amount of water use. Doing groundwater drip irrigation where you go right below the soil has benefits by reducing the amount of fertilizers needed as well as water, and you can increase productivity. So there are a lot of places in the world that are looking at this. The United States is somewhat doing this in California, from what I understand. Of course, through the Midwest, we don't yet.
Well, I've got a lot of almond farmers in my district, and I mean, they tell me when they reduce water usage, their almond production goes down. It's that simple. Is that, in your mind, is that necessarily?
Well, it is connected with the biology, which is the trans-evaporation rate. To get more output, you have to have that go up. And so that's where the consumption comes in. But it's the pan evaporation that doesn't lead to that we have to minimize. And if you can minimize the pan evaporation, that doesn't lead to crop. But you do have to have what's called trans-evaporation to produce crop. And there's just no way of getting around that.
You seem to be, another comment? Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, yeah. There's the basic issue of getting the water to where it's needed, which is the root zone or the leaf. You could argue that spraying the water out into the air isn't very efficient. You could argue that where it's possible, drip irrigation doesn't work with all crops, but drip irrigation not only delivers water, but more and more farmers find they can deliver various chemicals or other things. It becomes like a IV, if you will, for a human. It's a great delivery system. So in crops and agricultural situations where you can use something like drip, or you can figure out a way to get more of the water that you're taking out of a storage pond or out of a river, wherever it's coming from, get more of that water into the effective location, then that's a great efficiency. And if that's done, then the productivity could actually increase. And I think that's what he's referring to in Israel.
And sort of a related question, you discussed the deletion of groundwater aquifers. It's a big issue. Are there geologic consequences to that? And how can we better use rainfall to recharge these? I mean, in California, we're close to the ocean. The rain comes and we flush it out to avoid flooding. But is it an effective way to use that to recharge our aquifers?
I guess I can, unless somebody else wants to jump in. Groundwater recharge is an issue. If you don't recharge, the land subsides. And there's subsidence occurring everywhere around the world and in the United States. Singapore, by the way, has subsided almost 30 centimeters in 30 years from pumping out groundwater aquifers. Same thing with Mexico City and of course, New Orleans. We know about that and other places. But you can recharge with rainwater, but typically the water needs to be really clean to get fast recharge rates. If it's not clean enough, it's slow. If it's muddy water, it doesn't recharge, and then you have to get rid of it from floods. So there is work going on to be able to clean it up effectively so that you can recharge aquifers more effectively.
Dr. Loftus.
May I go back to your previous question? I think there's an opportunity here to think a little more holistically, thinking about agriculture and their needs for water. We've spent billions and billions of dollars improving our wastewater treatment plants, and we really produce some pretty high quality wastewater that can present no health problems, but yet it's nutrient rich. And so you could apply treated wastewater to corn, for example, and eliminate the farmer's need to buy urea or other forms of nitrogen that they use at great expense given the price of oil these days, and actually boost their productivity and profitability, and at the same time provide an outlet for effluent that might otherwise cause a problem if it's being put into a sensitive stream and degrading water quality, for example.
Looks like my time is about expired, Mr. Chairman.
Sounds to me that would involve actually planning the use of the land as well, so that you could have best use of the land nearest where there's a lot that has to
And we're seeing that happening now, beginning to happen. In the beverage industry, certainly we're seeing beneficial reuse of their waste streams directly for land application and things of that nature. So those practices are evolving. If I may make a quick comment,
please.
Just to the agricultural discussion. I think the whole discussion really speaks to the need for the various sectors to come together and be looking for solutions in total. We've got Pepsi and Coca-Cola. I mean, we all know the rivalry between those two businesses working together on a common problem and a common issue for their industry. And I think the same is here. I think the agriculture industry, heavy into technical manufacturing industry, food and beverage sectors need to come together and be looking at and collaborate and look at water uses and practices. There's a lot of new technology that is being developed Agricultural industry should not be afraid of this. We all need their products as we need other products. So for us to have the sectors coming together and realizing that this current federal policy we're discussing today works to coalesce and get collaboration across federal agencies, somewhere out there we need to begin to create this cross-industry sector collaboration and solution-solving forum. So I just kind of hearing it's at 50,000 feet what we're talking about here today. These are the kind of things I think that we see we need to have and certainly trying to do within the beverage industry. So, pass.
Ms. Biggert, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. It's been very interesting. I was just sitting here looking at this bottle of water and thinking that it wasn't too long ago that this bottle of water cost more than a gallon of gasoline. Now, that's no longer true, and unfortunately, it's not that the price of water has gone down, but the price of gasoline has skyrocketed. So we have a lot of challenges, I think, facing us, and hopefully that we can come up with some solutions quickly. And I would like to welcome Dr. Loftus here from the CMAP. I live in the Metropolitan Chicago area and so certainly appreciate all that you do is to provide us with good drinking water. When I first moved to Hinsdale, we had well water and it smelled like rotten eggs, and finally we did go off the well water and use Lake Michigan. That has been a wonderful resource, but there are challenges there too in how much water we can use. But I just wanted to ask everybody and then come back to another question, just so that we can be clear. Do you envision a bill to control water usage, or merely to monitor and predict it, in such as the bill that we're draft legislation that we're looking at now? Should it be to control water use or to monitor and predict it? I'll start with you, Dr. Shannon.
I was envisioning this as a way to monitor and provide new ways of providing new water, not as a control, but as providing opportunities to improve water management.
Mr. Christensen?
Same answer. I view this as a means of collecting some of the information and data and technology development that will allow us to make the business decisions we need to make that would have the impact and put the controls in place. So without some of the foundational research and technology development that this policy would create, we're not really in a position yet to make the appropriate decisions of control. Pass.
Dr. Loftus?
I don't see a present need for control. I think we have an opportunity to better orchestrate a lot of good pieces that are already in place.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I think I would agree that the need for control is certainly not there, and I think it would be a very, very difficult undertaking. And if we put that same level of energy into coordinating the research that's currently available and the prospective research, and I think pulling together some of the NGOs along with the federal government to make those things happen, then we see ourselves in a very different environment and causing people to think differently about resources that we utilize.
And Mr. Johnson, I'd like to thank you for tearing up the street in front of my house here in Washington and getting rid of the lead pipes.
I've never seen a new street that I didn't want to cut.
Well, it's a very nice street now. And then Mr. Spooner.
I agree with the other panel members. The research and information needs to precede any control mechanisms.
Okay, and Dr. Hatch?
I think we're all unanimous. It's more coordination, management, research, information, those areas, not control.
Thank you. Then, Dr. Loftus, you said in your testimony that overall, as elsewhere in the United States, our challenge in the Chicago region is not so much water scarcity, but water waste. Do you mean the treatment of water, or wasting it, or not conserving it?
The latter. I hesitate to say this, but I kind of want to say that we're sort of spoiled in the Chicago region, and we've had abundant, very generous supplies. We haven't really needed to conserve water. It's been priced quite low. So naturally, it's hard to conserve something that's nearly free or priced inexpensively. So I think there's just an opportunity to value water much more highly, and as a result, just simply become more efficient with its use without causing pain.
Do you think that then going to a national level, as far as, the coordination with on a national level with all of the states, the local governments, that we could get a message out to people to conserve more? Is this?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I think it's critical that the federal government become an active voice and show leadership and provide guidance to states who have programs that, like our own state of Illinois program, is interested in evolving and becoming better at managing state supplies. But, again, guidance, incentives, direction from the federal government would be, maybe I'm an idealist, but I think it would be really useful.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And I recognize Ms. Giffords for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Ranking Member Inglis. This is a terrific hearing, and I'm just very pleased that so many of you could be here today to talk about an issue that is really going to drive our economy and certainly national security into the future. I think that wars of the future will be fought over water, not necessarily over oil, and I don't think the American people really understand what we've got headed down the road towards us. I come from southern Arizona. We have an interesting situation where we've had delivery of the Central Arizona project for many years. I come from a part of Arizona, though, that has been heavily reliant on groundwater for most of those years, where our larger city, Phoenix, has been reliant on surface water for most of its growth. So there's an interesting relationship that we have. Southern Arizona conserves much, much more than Phoenix. When you go to southern Arizona, rare to see a lawn, rare to see larger swimming pools. I mean, you'll see a lot more of that up in the Phoenix area. So my first question is for Mr. Shannon, because you talked a lot about groundwater. I just had a town hall hearing a couple of weeks ago in Sahuarita. It's a booming part of southern Arizona, a lot of retirees near Green Valley, just north of Nogales. And there's a shortage of about 35,000 to 40,000 acre feet per year that we're seeing in this area of drawdown. And I'm concerned because this area is going to continue to boom. We're the second fastest growing state in the nation. And this area is also sandwiched between large agricultural interests and mining interests as well. We all know that we have record drought in the West, and certainly we see that with that record drought that we're going to have more and more users on the Colorado, but less and less water supply. I was also surprised to read your testimony about how little actually is known about groundwater, how we don't have a lot of information out there. So could you specifically talk about some of the necessary research that we're going to need in the future towards groundwater?
Thank you very much for this question, because it's actually a crucial question where I think the federal government can make a huge impact. Understanding groundwater is, we understand it fairly well if you can actually drill wells and you can actually look at how it flows. But water flows, if you draw down one, it actually will pull from another area and will impact another area. Also, the depths at which you go to the water. As you go down deeper and deeper, it gets saltier, because heavier water drops. And when you're down in the oil regions, it's all very, very salty typically. And the salts are different. There are some mostly hard salts. And so as you're looking at how the water moves from the surface to the ground and from the ground to the ground, it's a very difficult thing to be able to do. And there are certainly USGS and others and oil companies have certainly looked a lot at this issue. But more research really needs to be done to understand this movement. And as you draw down, it actually changes the amount of water that's at the surface. And I was at a meeting at the Joint Services, because the Department of Defense is very interested in this issue. And they were talking about a base in Arizona, and I'm trying to remember the name of the base.
Huachuca.
Yes. And thank you. And they were looking at the water. They've done most of the research there and the way it's flowing. And as they have drawn down the aquifer more, literally the river that flows on top of it gets pulled down. And so there becomes less surface water because you're starting to recharge that aquifer. So understanding the whole water balance is absolutely crucial. And it needs a lot more research to be able to know what to do. Right now we kind of guess. And a lot of it's just guessing. And if you sit there watching it drop, you say, well, maybe we should draw less. But it's not fully understood yet. And I know that sounds strange after all these hundreds of years of looking at it, but it still needs more research. And this is something where the federal government can really have an impact.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning Fort Huachuca. There's an interesting relationship between the San Pedro River,
Right.
which is the second most diverse ecological area outside of Costa Rica and all of North America. It's a small river. It's known as the last free-flowing river of the West. It's not very wide. Obviously, it's through the desert. But the amount of species that are there are fabulous. I mean, very incredible. It's a migratory area, of course, for birds. But because of the endangered species law, the fort was required to reduce its water consumption. So I guess my next question is really aimed at Mr. Hatch, but following up on Representative Biggert. What the fort did in just a few short months, in less than a couple of years, is the garrison commander came into Fort Huachuca knowing that they had to reduce the water consumption, and essentially they put in low-flow toilets and they put in low-flow water shower heads on the taps, and went through all those lawns and said, you know what, we can't have lawns here anymore. We're in the desert. We've got a drought, and that's pretty heavily monitored. So they've cut their water consumption by about 50%, which is extraordinary. Now, he can do that because he's the garrison commander, and he can go around to all these different houses and tell people what they have to do. But, for Mr. Hatch, this whole concept of public education is phenomenal. But I want to know where it actually works. Because I think that we as humans, we really like our creature comforts. I mean, we like having our nice hot showers. We like being able to turn on the tap and know that we're going to have direct delivery of water, and that's very much the quality and the standard of life we're accustomed to. But if starting with Mr. Hatch, if the others could join in, can we talk, an honest facts about how we are going to educate the public and get them to change some of their behavior so that we don't just continue to think that just water comes out of bottles and it just should be very inexpensive and ready to use, because we really do have some challenges ahead.
I guess there are several problems. That's a big question. One of the things I'm working on is the effectiveness of conservation measures. And immediately you hit up against the problem that the pricing, as said earlier, it's so inexpensive. I joke that if I could get my son to stop text messaging, I'd probably save more money than I would not using water at all in my house. Obviously, there's you can go to certain states, and I think this was mentioned earlier by the person from Chicago, that you can learn a lot from other states. I think Florida, for the eastern states, Florida has done quite a bit with low-flow showers, various types of appliances and this kind of thing. There's other places that are giving rebates for using water-conserving appliances. But once again, I think it's as much the issue of attitude. Just because it's inexpensive, it's just not on a lot of people's radar screen. And I think it seems like it takes a drought to get people's attention. It's definitely gotten people's attention in this sort of Atlanta, North Carolina, Georgia area with the recent drought. But you're always concerned that after a few years of adequate rainfall, maybe people are just going to become less interested. So I think some research into the effectiveness of these management measures or methods would be very useful.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. I do want to ask Mr. Johnson a quick question about your testimony. You discussed how D.C. WASA is different from most other U.S. municipal water utilities. What can you teach us? What can you tell us about better coordination based on your experiences at WASA?
Well, I think that based on our experiences here, we're I think the District of Columbia and the state of Wyoming, I believe, are the only two entities that are not regulated by state organization where primacy resides with the state. So our interactions are primarily with U.S. EPA out of Region 3. That's one of the unique characteristics, and the fact that we're established as both by local and federal law. I think that that kind of regulatory regime puts us a little closer to where a number of things are happening across the country in terms of some of the research and other things that are occurring, certainly much closer to a stricter regulatory regime. And what we're finding here in the district that's kind of unique is that when we start talking about sharing these water bodies, my view is that we've probably outlived the usefulness of the Clean Water Act in its present form, and not need to start looking at things like watershed-based utilization of resources and water, because we can have something to occur in the District of Columbia and across Southern Avenue in Prince George's County with regard to water supply will be totally different in terms of what we have to do for restrictions and other kinds of things. So we ought to be managing these pieces on the worst problem first basis, as opposed to those things that are first legislated for us to do. And I think that would give us a very different outcome and experience, both on the clean water side as well as the wastewater side.
Clean water versus wastewater.
Well, I think that the two are tied very closely together. As an example, if we talk about pharmaceuticals, do you control the source and keep them from ever getting into the water body? Do you control it through treating the water at the water purification plant, or do you treat it at the wastewater plant where it's coming out and being discharged into the waterway, which is probably the most expensive approach? So that's why I say that we have to couple these things together and look at this research kind of as one. Both on wastewater and water, in order to get an effective approach for looking at how we manage water resources in totality. The use of gray water is an example. The reuse of water is something that people have been experimenting with on a very limited basis here in this country, but it's been very widely used in other countries. So I think that those two things have to come together in order for us to have an effective and well-coordinated plan. We have a situation now where in some agencies of the federal government, the permit writers don't talk to the people who are the regulators, who don't talk to the people across the hall who are the permit writers, and that's all dealing in one area. So I think if we start to cross-pollinate all of those and begin to pull them together, we see ourselves making some sense of a resource that is rapidly becoming a limited resource in this country. Things will change with climate change and other factors, and will not always remain the same. We will not always be a water-rich community as we currently are today, and we need to plan for that.
Well, I certainly hope we do. One of Beverage is just when we were talking a few minutes ago about the bottle, and she used that delivery this small quantity of water to us through the bottle, and the bottle itself took about 3 times the amount of water to make the bottle than what is contained within it. Is that pretty accurate, Mr. Christensen? And how much of that is recycled?
I'm not in a position to comment and give you exact figures and go on any kind of record with those numbers, but yeah, certainly you have to, in any product, there's the packaging component does consume water, as does the product itself. Food is the same way. So, this is 100% water inside the bottle. There is obviously a water consumption. To say it's 3 times, I'm certainly not in a position to say that's a fact.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can certainly speak to the cost of delivering water. In this city, I can deliver water to you to your tap for 0.7 cents a gallon. That's less than a penny a gallon for water that's been tested, that meets all the federal regulations and standards that are established for water supplies.
We had that conversation up here a few minutes ago as well. We may be talking about some more of that. All of these things have been fascinating, and many of our colleagues have mentioned some things. Ranking Member and I, Mr. English, were talking a couple of things that have come up. One, the refer to it as injection, but the restoring water, putting water back into aquifers. Talked about how in so many of our areas along the coast, where we have storms and significant quantities of rain that come at times, we're spending huge amounts of money to channelize water routes to get rid of that water. We're buying up houses in places so that we can stop having to pay so much money to rebuild those houses every time they flood. The list of the things that we have been doing seems to go on and on and on. And are we going to, his question, are we going to find ourselves at a point where we're wanting to go back and undo all those things that we've done? And I'm not so sure that that's not something that we shouldn't be considering. And the sooner the better. And my question, if there's a question in that, is what our proposal is, create a committee to address these issues, assist in getting us to a point where we can address some of these kinds of things. Anybody have a thought on it? Are we going in the right direction?
Yeah, we believe you are. Because it's not just about conservation. It's not just about changing our habits. It is about looking at reuse applications. It is about recycling water. It is about directing water to beneficial, waste streams to beneficial reuse. It's about all of these things. And many of the outcomes that you've laid out in this policy take us down that path. And again, starting with the inventory of what we have and beginning to look at needs and starting the process of cross-agency collaboration. And hopefully we can build similar models as we have within the Beverage Group, get cross-sector collaborations going and exchange. And we're seeing that beginning to happen, but certainly not at the rate that may be necessary. But yes, you are going the right direction. Thanks.
Mr. Inglis? Owen?
If I may, I just wanted to say, yes, I think the draft legislation holds a lot of promise. You can't expect one piece of legislation to be all things for all people, but this is a definite step in the right direction. I would just urge you to think hard about extending that coordination so that it just isn't horizontal at the federal level, but somehow makes tangible connections with states and the private sector so that we can really make progress together. The other thing I would urge you to consider is to have that National Water Census address the issue of water use reporting. Again, we can't manage what we don't measure. So there's potential in that census to take a meaningful step in that direction.
Thank you.
If I may just weigh in real quickly.
Sure.
The points that were being made here, I could sort of say it's a stovepiping. Right now, everything's stovepiped. We call it stovepipe, but we have drinking water, we have wastewater, we have storm sewer water, everything gets divided up. Each agency divides everything up, and we really have to break down these stovepipes. And I think this type of legislation can go a huge way towards that. That's why I'm very excited about it.
Now, Mr. Inglis.
Thank you. The Chairman and I were just talking about these retention ponds. And can somebody tell me whether do those replenish groundwater, or do they ultimately make their way into replenishing aquifers, or does anybody know?
Excuse me, you're talking about typical retention ponds next to a new construction building. Likely, and I'll allow Mr. Shannon, but hydrogeologically probably are not having a great impact on our source aquifers. Shallow aquifers, yes, but it's probably feeding some of the surface water bodies. It's much more shallow aquifer recharge, and which in a more immediate direction probably manifests itself in terms of some surface discharge.
To actually do direct recharge of a deep water aquifer, you actually have to drill a pipe and pump it up and actually pressurize it, which costs money and energy. Or you can get the water very clean, and then it can actually flow more readily. It depends on the ground. But the typical retention pond is not a percolation pond. It may do something, it will affect it somewhat, but you need a lot of pressure to really get it to go down. So, I mean, you either need a lot of area, and that costs land, or a smaller area and higher pressure, typically.
So a retention pond is not a percolation pond?
Not typically, no. Actually, many of them are lined with clay and the like, so that you don't cause contamination of shallow aquifers from a retention pond that's capturing runoff. Because runoff has all sorts of things in it, distillates and oils and all sorts of things from stormwater. So stormwater retention ponds typically are not. They're to prevent flooding, but not for recharge. If one wants to use it, you can do it, and there are places that do that, and not as many in this country, but there are a lot of places that absolutely depend and rely on this runoff for their sources of water. But you have to do some cleaning to do it, typically.
A percolation pond does clean as it goes through? Or
Yeah, usually it's graded gravel, so you'll start with some sands and gravel, and as you go down, the engineers will grade it so that it does some filtering as the water seeps down and makes a more direct route to the aquifer.
I think what the gentleman's saying is correct. One good example of where that's been utilized for recharging and for drinking water is Austin, Texas, which has done a tremendous job, but they've had to do several different things in order to make it work. One is change people's habits with regard to fertilizers and use of other pollutants that go into those retention ponds, but they attempt to recapture all the water that comes across the land and reuse it there. Very, very effective project.
I'm curious to know where a project is where there's actual recharging or injecting water that has been held back and trying to replenish. Any place in the United States where that's being done? Does anyone know?
Well, I think kind of what we're talking about here is conjunctive use, conjunctive management of water, and I think California, Colorado, and Arizona might be leaders in the complementarity that's available in managing surface and groundwater supplies, which in some cases includes artificial recharge of aquifers during flood events, for example, where we're capturing that extra flow that would otherwise just make its way to the ocean, capture it to recharge an aquifer, using the aquifers during dry times rather than really wet times when there's access to a surface water source. It's not available everywhere. It really does depend on the geology, the lithology of that particular spot on Earth, whether or not it's amenable to accommodating infiltration or not.
This has been fascinating, and I could stay here for a long time and continue to have questions just to try to learn this stuff. I think that we've got an awful lot of teaching country, how we build our communities, what we're going to be doing with land and water. We're starting to see planned communities come up, and particularly in our area, which is so low along the coastline, and there's been so much flooding. Now we're doing much better use of those retention. It was always too easy, it seemed like, to dredge a channel to get rid of the water that we know is going to ultimately flood so we could go build some more houses over here in this pasture. Now we're starting to realize the benefit of retention, and now if we can figure out how to use the water that we capture, all that much better. Well, thank you all very much. We appreciate you appearing before the committee this afternoon. Dr. Hatch, I apologize. I didn't look up as often as I looked at this level, and so I hope we didn't exclude you from that.
No
we
problem.
appreciate you joining us in the manner in which you did. Under the rules of the committee, the record will be held open for 2 weeks for members to submit additional statements and any additional questions that they might have for the witnesses. This hearing is now adjourned. This hour final? I was back.